see you guys in the dark.
I was 20 and had moved from England to live and work in London. I had no real experience of relationships. On the outside, I appeared extrovert and quite toughy. On the inside, I had no self-confidence. I looked in the mirror, and all I could see was a fat, ugly, aggressive, and unlikable person. I now see none of that was true, but it meant I was vulnerable. I met a man named Robert, who was 27 years old. We dated, and 6 months later, I moved into his flat. There were loads of red flags, which I stupidly ignored until I was living in a nightmare. It started with control and emotional abuse. Now I grew up in a rough area of a city in England, and I could handle myself. I had quite a temper. So at the beginning, I gave as good as I got, but it escalated to him cheating on me, assaulting me, locking me in the flat, isolating me, mind games, and taking my money. There were too many incidents to write about here, but suffice to say that in 12 months, he terrorized me until I hardly recognized myself. I was desperate to escape, but deep down, I always knew that when I left him, I would be in danger, so I just kept putting it off. One day, he started another fight, but this time he told me to get out. I didn't need telling twice. I packed my stuff and was gone within 10 minutes. I had no close friends because he would be so vile that nobody stayed around for long. I rang a girl that I used to work with and begged her to let me stay with her for the night. She gave me her address and let me stay with her for a month in her flat, which was about a mile from his. This meant that I had to use the same tube station to get to work. It started one morning when he was waiting at the tube station. I heard the words, "You fucking slag," in my ear, and I ran through the morning rush hour crowd to the train with my heart pounding. He escalated it from that point onwards. He would be at the station waiting for me a couple of times a week. He would stand behind me as I got my ticket and would verbally abuse me. He would never shout or draw attention to himself, but he would call me names and threaten me in a low tone of voice that made my stomach heave. I never reacted because I knew that's what he wanted. I foolishly hoped that he would get fed up and leave me alone. Then he started to show up in the neighborhood around my workplace in West London. I told my manager and colleagues, but this was before mobile phones were commonly used. Other than keeping an eye out for him, they wouldn't do much to help me. Sometimes I would see him at a distance standing on a corner, or catch a glimpse of him in the local market, and then he would vanish. I thought I was going mad or developing paranoia. I moved out of my friend's flat into a shared house about 1.5 miles away from him. I didn't know any other areas of London, and I had made some friends in the area, so I didn't want to leave the area completely. I used the same station, and as I stopped seeing him there, I thought he was starting to move on. It took me a couple of weeks to notice that the white van with blacked out windows that was permanently parked across the road from my flat. I thought it belonged to a neighbor. I was horrified when I realized that it was him, and he would sit in that van day and night, watching and tracking my movements. One day, soon after the van appeared, he approached one of my housemates to give me a message and ask for the house telephone number. I wasn't that friendly with my housemates, so I hadn't told them what was going on. They thought he was a friend and gave him my number. From then on, he rang every night, all through the night. Eventually, I told them what happened, and they promised not to let him and unplugged the phone at night. He started to leave gifts and cards on the doorstep. My room was on the ground floor, and a brick was thrown through my window. I am phobic about birds, and I kept finding dead birds on my windowsill. I was a nervous wreck, flinching at shadows and jumping at the slightest sound. I thought about moving again, but I knew that he would find through my workplace. I went to the police, who said because he hadn't actually done anything, there was nothing that they could do. This was before stalking was a criminal offense in the UK. I would come home to find typed letters posted to the door asking me why I had been to a certain shop, or a cafe, or a theater on certain days or nights. The letter would ask me why I had visited a certain address and who lived there. It was relentless, and I knew he was letting me know that he was there watching at all times. I wanted to leave London and go back home, but I couldn't tell my family what was happening, as my mother was seriously ill, and I didn't want to worry my dad and my siblings, as they had enough to deal with. In desperation, I needed to pretend that I had left London by packing a couple of suitcases, taking them back to my home city. I knew he would be watching me, and I hoped that he would be fooled. I totally underestimated my lunacy. I would stay at my best housemate's when I returned home. I thought I saw him once, but I thought I was just being paranoid. The night after I arrived, I went out for a couple of drinks with my best friend Diane and 2 other friends. We went to a couple of bars, listened to some music, and all ended up back at her house, just drinking and chatting. A couple of days later, I returned to London. There was a note waiting for me on the doormat. I opened it, and to my horror, it contained details of my night out, along with threats about what would happen to me for being a cheating bitch. It mentioned John. It named bars where we had drank, and even the name of the band. Then he rang the house phone screaming and ranting words that made no sense. I saw one of his friends who told me that, unbeknownst to me, the crazy ex had drove 200 miles and gone straight to my best friend's house. He had watched me go out and wait for me to return from that night. Then he followed John home and waited outside of his house too. The following day, when John went to his local pub for a Sunday afternoon drink, the maniac ex followed John in there and made a point of chatting to him to find out his name. This has gone on for about 4 months at this point. After about a month, I was on my home phone from work. It was winter around 7 p.m., and the streets were dark. He grabbed me on a side street, dragged me into the back of the van. I was petrified and crying in the dark of the van, being thrown from the side to side. All I could hear was the radio. He didn't say a word. After about an hour, the van stopped, and the back door opened. I was in an empty car park with trees around it. He kept his hand on the back of my neck as he made me walk for about 20 minutes through what I guessed was a forest. He never said a word as I asked him where we were going and why he was doing this. It was as though he was deaf. He didn't even acknowledge what I was saying. The night was freezing, and there was no lights other than his torch. I didn't know how many times I fell over and got dragged back up to my feet. Eventually, we reached a sort of clearing, and he pulled me behind a tree with a stick and a plastic bag tied to it. Then he showed me a shallow rectangular hole in the ground and said that was my grave, and he would happily go to prison knowing that I was dead because of all the pain that I had caused him. He pulled a short, thin blue rope from his pocket, and at that point, he looked unrecognizable. His expression was pure darkness, and all I could see was his eyes, that crazy and staring right through me. He had his hand on my throat, and a rope in his other hand. I swear that I have never been scared that much in my life. I was shaking with terror, and I knew if he put the rope near me, I would piss myself. I honestly thought that forest clearing would be the last place that I would ever see again in this world. Suddenly, I knew with complete certainty that I had to stay calm if I was to get out of this alive. I told him he didn't need to do this, that I knew I was wrong to make him mad. It was all my fault, and I was sorry. I told him we could get back together, and I knew now that he really loved me. In the end, God knows how, but I somehow got through to him, and his eyes cleared. He spoke to me. He agreed to let me go and get my things to move back in with him. He drove me back to my flat. I ran inside and collapsed on the floor while he waited outside. He started beeping his horn, banging on the door, and ranting and raving outside of my house. My housemate rang the police, but he left as they arrived in the street. I gave them his details and told them what had happened. He denied everything, and the police said that there was no witnesses, so it was my word against his. The police told me that they had warned him, but ultimately they couldn't do anything without proof. I gave them the notes he had left, the van registration, the names of the people who could identify what I was saying, but still they said it wasn't enough to arrest him and charge him. They checked the van registration, but it wasn't registered in his name. And so the stalking and the harassment continued. I started carrying a rape alarm, a hairspray, a screwdriver, and anything else that I thought might protect me. I hadn't slept properly for weeks, and food stuck in my throat if I tried to eat. I was a shadow of my normal self. Friends of his came to see me to tell me to leave London as he was obsessed with revenge because I had been to the police. I went to the solicitor, who wrote a cease and desist letter. I found parts of it ripped up on my doorstep. About 6 months from the start of the terror campaign, I was asked out on a date by Gary, who was a friend of my friend's boyfriend, Pete. I was trying to convince myself that I could carry on living with some semblance of normality. I agreed to go out with Gary if Pete came along too. After a few drinks, we went to a club. Pete, who wasn't drinking, said he would give us a lift home. We were in Pete's car, and he started the engine and drove for about 5 minutes. Then I heard Pete say there's something wrong with my brakes. Then he said that there was a white van following us. My heart started beating 100 miles per hour, and my throat started to close as I asked him, "Does the van have the reg number 1234? To my horror, it did. It was him following us. I quickly had to explain to Pete and Gary that I had a lunatic ex-boyfriend who had just happened to be stalking me right at that very moment. Pete was only driving about 20 miles per hour. He pulled the car over, and we jumped out, ran through a housing estate of tenant flats until we lost him. We found a mini cab office, and as I was too scared to go back to my flat, I ended up sleeping on Gary's couch. Unsurprisingly, the potential new relationship ended that night. The next day, Gary rang me to say that they had been back to pick up the car, and the brake cable had been partially cut until it was nearly severed. I truly believe he tried to kill all three of us that night. Gary and Pete wanted me to go to the police, but I had lost all faith in them. Every time I asked the police to help me, they had done nothing, and it just made things worse, by reinforcing how powerless I was. Enough was enough. I knew that he wasn't going to stop. I didn't even know what he wanted anymore. That same week, I gave notice to my flat and handed in my notice at work. I booked a 6-month air ticket to India as, in my crazy mind, I thought, well, it's one of the most populated places on the planet, so he will never find me there. I traveled around India on my own for 6 months. I did a lot of thinking and healing and returned to my home city. I never returned to London, and thank God I never saw him again. I'm currently a senior in high school. I live in a pretty nice town in North Carolina. It all started a year ago when I was 16. At the time, I was working at Starbucks as a barista. It was Thursday, and surprisingly, the cafe was almost empty. A few minutes before the end of my shift, one of my colleagues informed me that a cute guy is here to see you. I was kind of confused. I didn't have a boyfriend at the time, and I'm pretty average, so I couldn't imagine that a guy could be interested in me. As I turned around, I recognized the boy instantly. Henry, my dad's best friend's son. He's 3 years older than me, and for some reason that I wasn't aware of, he enjoyed making me feel miserable, calling me fat, ugly, and all the other sweet things that you really want to hear as an already insecure teenager. So for obvious reasons, seeing him at my workplace didn't fill me with joy. Now on a completely objective point of view, he was a very good-looking guy. Blonde hair, blue eyes, but he knew that he was attractive, which made me want to punch his smirk off of his handsome face. Henry was actually here to apologize for being a complete douchebag, and confess that he actually really liked me, and didn't know how to act around me because I radiate such a powerful energy. It's really destabilizing. Being the dumb girl that I was, I accepted his apologies, and from that moment on, we kept in touch every day. He would send me good morning and good night texts, give me cute nicknames, and whatever couples do. However, he never asked me to be his girlfriend, but would introduce himself to others as my one and true love. Should have been the red flag from the start. He would show up at my place without asking me at least once a week. I live alone with my dad, who actually really liked the boy, so my old man didn't care about his constant presence at the house. After a few months into our relationship, I decided to call it off. He was being really possessive. He was jealous of my friends, and I discovered that he was in contact with his previous girlfriend. He kept on telling me not to worry about it. His reaction wasn't what I expected. He shrugged and was, "Okay, whatever you want, babe." Don't get me wrong, I didn't want him to hurt because of me, But he seemed so nonchalant about this, it was almost worrying. I thought the story would end here, but oh, I was wrong. Even after the breakup, he kept on coming over and taking naps on my bed while I wasn't home. When I confronted him about it, he would respond with, "I came to see your dad," or "We're still friends. I don't see what's bothering you." Well, honey, what's bothering me is that if you weren't wearing an expensive-ass cologne with a strong-ass smell, I wouldn't know that you came in my room while I was out. I tried to tell my dad that Henry and I weren't together anymore, and that he had no right to come over and make himself at home in my own room. He just laughed and said that I was being a drama queen. So I guess you understand why I'm kind of stuck at this point. What I didn't know was that Henry was basically following me everywhere I went. I noticed it a few weeks ago, but I'm pretty sure that it has been going on for quite some time now. He would follow my car as I was going to school, park his truck in the Starbucks parking lot whenever I was working, and would peek through my bedroom window and leave handprints. How did this dumbass chick not notice it before? Well, as a horror movie fan and true crime podcast enthusiast, it's not unusual to feel observed or spied on. Plus, his truck was pretty common, so I couldn't tell if it was him or not. Until a few weeks ago, my car had a problem with one of the tires, so I had to take the bus for a little while. One morning as I got out of my house, I saw his truck. Immediately made out his face as he was sitting in the driver's seat, and that's when I connected the dots. My gut feeling going into a frenzy whenever I was out. 3 of my tires being slashed, and handprints on my bedroom window. When the realization hit me, a shiver ran down my spine. I felt paralyzed, and tears welled up in my eyes. I felt nauseous and decided that I needed to talk about it to somebody, because I've read through stories about it. I made up my mind and told my friend Tyler, who's 5 years older than me and is studying law, the whole story, and he unfortunately told me that I couldn't do anything because I didn't have any concrete proof, and it would be my word against Henry's, and he's a damn good manipulator. Now I'm stuck because I don't know what to do. I tried to take pictures of his car, but due to the lack of light in my neighborhood, I never managed to snap one in which we could recognize him. Whenever he's parked in front of my house and make eye contact, he usually just starts up the truck and then drives off. I haven't seen him in 3 days. However, my gut feeling is still making me go batshit crazy.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.